Well, thank you very, very much for this invitation to celebrate the 20th anniversary of China's accession to the WTO. If this was a wedding anniversary, and I think in a way, China becoming a member of the World Trade Organization was some sort of wedding. And I think that by now, I would argue that those that participated in the wedding are no longer newlywed after 20 years. But if this was a wedding anniversary, the 20th wedding anniversary is the porcelain anniversary. Now, China knows porcelain very well because China invented it. And porcelain, we know, is both strong and delicate. And I think this anniversary is a good image of where we are today, 20 years later. Let me outline where I think the strength part is. I think the WTO is stronger as a result of China becoming a member of the organization. We've heard this. With China representing 1/5 of the world, you cannot claim that the WTO is really global, is really world, if China is not in it. So it gave the WTO a big legitimacy push when it became a member. I think accession also made the WTO stronger in that the insertion of China into the global economy happened within a framework of rules. And this generated predictability, as opposed to having the insertion of China follow just simply the laws of the jungle, where, it's all about the survival of the strongest. It laid a framework that gave predictability, and this was good for the WTO. It also made China stronger. It helped the Chinese leadership manage this enormous transformation of its economy that ultimately resulted in the eradication of extreme poverty. This is an incredible achievement by all standards. I also think that WTO accession made the rest of the world stronger. It provided businesses with trade and investment opportunities around the world. It gave consumers choice and access to products and services like never before. But above all, it ensured that China would be seated at the table to manage in a co-responsible manner the growing interdependence that we have seen in this last 20 years, whether it's in the area of trade, whether it's in the area of finance or on climate change. The name of the game is growing interdependence. But if we are to be fair, I think we also have to recognize that 20 years later, there are fragilities that need to be addressed if this porcelain that is the WTO is to keep providing this strong insurance policy. I want to focus on 3 concrete fragilities that we need to address, that the world needs to address together. The first one comes from the impact that this large insertion of China into the global economy has had, the impact that it has had on Chinese business and on Chinese citizens and workers, but also the impact that it also has had on on businesses, workers around the world in other countries. It's difficult to dissociate the impact of China from the impact of other transformations that have happened in these 20 years, and most notably, the big technological transformation. It's difficult to disentangle the two, but it's fair to say that there's been winners and there's also been losers. And what we have learned from this fragility, from the fragility of the losers, is that countries need to strengthen social safety nets if we are to keep alive the idea of continuous trade and investment openings. The second fragility comes from the WTO rulebook itself. it needs a serious reform if the WTO is to adapt to the big changes that have happened since China became a WTO member, but also from the big change that is that China today is a systemic actor. So what China does or what China does not do has a very clear impact, a substantial impact on the rest of the world. Now, we know, we've heard this from previous speakers, we know that the rules of the WTO on public subsidies, whether these are on agriculture, on industry, on services. We know that rules on state trading enterprises. We know that rules on the digital economy. We know that rules on market access need a serious update. And I think that here, China should not just engage in this conversation. I think it's important that China co-leads this discussion. This discussion is not about economic changes in economic systems. It's not economic system change. It's about rules of the game that will guarantee fairness, that will guarantee predictability, and that will guarantee transparency to trade exchanges. It's about making sure that there is a level playing field. And again, I think there is a bigger space here for China that is now a big systemic actor to be leading with others, obviously with other big trading nations, whether it's the United States and the European Union, and with others around the world, this reform. The third fragility comes from the belief that unilateral policies, that inward-looking plans, that unfair practices, or even disengagement from the system will protect and will provide an economic and even a geopolitical advantage. And here, I think we need to be very lucid. The reality is that in an interdependent world, the most effective avenue to protect the only means to provide for win-win outcomes is the avenue of multilateral cooperation, multilateral engagement. And I want to stress this because I think this has to be central to looking into the future to ensure that we continue strengthening by dealing with the fragilities that the trading system has. So congratulations, China, on the 20th anniversary of becoming a member of the WTO. I very much look forward to more engagement from China, not just in the next 20 years, but first starting with the next 20 months that will be essential to whether or not we are capable of reshaping the global trading system and its future. Thank you again, Xie, and looking forward to continuing in this dialogue.